Okay, welcome everyone. It's 4/23 of 2015. We're going to look at Ricoeur's epistemology and hermeneutic of selfhood. He begins with this introduction in 3 moments. The first is the very preliminary moment of analysis and reflection within the sensate actuality. And it's where we ask the who question, that initial question of identity. It is an area where we really rely on analytic philosophy, and it does contain, even at this initial moment, we always have a motivational base that is internally held within the psyche and the long-term memory. And that motivational base is always a recurring critique that we can go to. It's our core motivational base that we all carry. He calls that motivational base the base of attestation. He says that it is relational to each and every one of the 3 moments of selfhood. It is a topos, which means it lacks permanence. It's always open to revision. It is an active gathering of every return out of every pausing that we make. The return is actively gathered into this workspace. It is an epistemological moment, simply because it is a returning activity, reflective activity of a motivational workspace. It's more of a testimony than it is a cognitive propositional truth. It's more of an emotive, psychic, testimonial type of conviction base. It is always an intention against finitude. Finitude always challenges it, and it refuses to allow it to close in on itself into some kind of permanence. Finitude is always disturbing it. We do get involved in the active return out of every positing because we want to reach more and more reliable attestation core conviction. We want that core conviction to become more and more reliable with all of our dialectical relationship to actuality. It does abbreviate within it the conscience of the self, which Ricoeur calls credence. This first moment is a lot of hyperbole, stretching of our posited notions, very experimental, nothing very solid to rely on. At the realm of the sensate, we really just have a lot of experimental hyperbole type truth moments, and you're always tension between deceit and veracity. Never any really true acquisition of a permanent truth. But we do have that unconscious long-term memory of our core of conviction, the core of attestation. Now, we do end up creating a very, very, very preliminary, and I underline preliminary, a plurality of signs that are just existing in their abstract mode. They have no content to them, and it's very preliminary, and a lot of times it's just us taking up the existing signs that already exist in an intersubjective way, and but we end up just with a very loose lexical plurality of signs that are abstract and without any concrete content. The why question as to who we are is always laid bare and open, and kind of a preliminary moment of postponement, awaiting every return out of the other moments in order to refine the realm of conviction and to slowly begin to pour content into this why question that has been laid bare and awaits content. So technically, in the first moment, we have an oscillating space of abstraction. He calls it an oscillating space of abstraction that awaits the indwelling of content, primarily out of the return moment. So it's really a kind of a workspace, kind of an area that works on the who question, that is laid bare and open, and kind of a self-sublating postponement until content can be acquired out of every return. From there, we're going to move into actually working on these signs and developing these abstract signs, sometimes borrowed signs out of an inner subjectivity that has already created signs. But we're going to take this very loose lexical framework. We're going to start working on meaning in the second moment. So in the second moment, we're looking at the action of positing. It's kind of the praxis-based moment where through the positing and return of praxis, which is within our very specific historical reality, that's where praxis is rooted. Within that praxis type of work, we actually can begin to acquire meanings for these abstract, roughly loose abstract lexical content and network. And so we're looking for a process that Ricoeur says is basically a description, narration, and prescribing. We just kind of like posit a generic concept of good. Initially, we don't really have a lot of content yet, so we just kind of have a generic concept of good, kind of a generalization more than a universal concept. And out of that generic goodness, we start working on some praxis positing. And so this is the praxis analysis of the self, and it's kind of an ongoing creation of a narrative, of a historical narrative of the self, and the defining of the self as the historical character. We define ourselves as historical character, and as historical character, we can actually begin extracting and partitioning meaning for the abstract lexical network of signs. So the oscillating who in the previous moment is shaken free and enters into the dialectic of exchange and praxis, and the abstract signs of the first moment are refined through the acquisition of meaning in order to partition them into meanings of permanent signs and meanings of variable signs. So we're starting to move into the what question of content. What is the content of my self-understanding? It's the moment of epistemological tendency. It's the metaphor of the wax tablet. And therefore, with that wax tablet analogy, we get involved in the praxis positing and return of a phenomenological type of positing in the realm of actuality. And we start getting some core partitioning taking place. We start to partition away signs that show a little more permanence. We begin to affirm the essential, and some of these signs start surfacing as being capable of escaping temporal alteration, and they possess more of a permanence of a hidden ahistorical truth. But all of this positing in this realm is kind of seeking after essence. It's always kind of having a healthy attitude of skepticism and doubt with regard to sensate existence. We know that the sensate realm is not the real, that there's a hidden spiritual dimension that needs to be acquired, and so we have this internal doubt that couples every praxis positing and every praxis return. And in that way we can get to essential content, and we can begin to partition away into a separate lexical area the signs that have some permanence of meaning for the ontological character of the self. So as preliminary work here gets done for the next moment of selfhood and otherness, and it kind of combines the analytic method of the first moment and the hermeneutical method of the second moment, and so it is a synthetic third moment, and we're looking for that ultimate ontological foundation of what it means to be a self, kind of a stable ontological meaning, and it will actually define for us what we consider to be the universal first-person subject. But now we're out of generalization and we're into universal acquisition. A true universality is sought and worked on. And it's that methodology, again, of keeping that healthy doubt of sensate existence in every positing. But now we begin to reflectively arrange the signs and the meanings of permanence into some kind of an ontological, ordered, syntactical whole. So now we've gone from a abstract sign to partitioned permanent meanings, and now we take the signs and the meanings and we form a synthetic ontological order, syntax. So the third moment is the synthetic ontological ordering of the abstract signs, the partitioned meanings of permanence, in order to kind of work up a stable ontological meaning. And so it is the moment of synthetic order. We do, in a way, we posit this as a critique derived from the otherness of the divine. It's because, according to Ricoeur, every human being innately is in possession of a notion of infinity already. So we kind of posit an otherness of the divine as kind of a additional subject of universality. And the finite nature of the previous moment, the second moment, is exposed, and we begin to really work on a notion of the true, a real grasping of the stable syntax of an ontological structured meaning for the abstract signs and the partitioned permanence of meaning. And this will lead to an ethic. It will automatically lead to an ethical dimension. The subject of moral dimension gets posited, and it will initiate its ethical practice as simply relying on a generic concept of justice, which we can refine later, but that's the initial stance, is simply the generic concept of justice. So we're getting a little bit of a foundation work here from Paul Ricoeur to kind of get a good starting point. He wants us to have just a little bit of bearing here before we get into his lectures. The book is a collection of lectures on selfhood, but they will fall within this framework. So he has edited the lectures into a triad of dialectics. And the triad of dialectics will bleed into each other's borders, and they will bleed into each other's borders because they all touch and bleed into the motivational core base of conviction of attestation. So think of that. Think of this triad, but then think of a circular realm that bleeds into all three corners of the triad, and that would be the motivational core base of attestation conviction, which also encloses conscience. It gives us a little preliminary first look of a foundational base for approaching Ricoeur's epistemology and hermeneutic of self.